Hi gang, in the Imperium of Warhammer 40k, few Space Marine chapters are as wide-ranging as the Marine Errant. Spread far and wide across the galaxy, serving alongside explorator fleets, vast crusades and rogue trader expeditions, the Marine Errant have fought in the most remote and haunted regions of the Void, even beyond the bounds of the galaxy itself. But their brief involvement in the Badab War would eventually come back to haunt them, their long-standing support networks destroyed, and their chapter on the brink of destruction. The Marine Errant were one of the very first chapters to be implicated in the unfolding story of the Badab War. A relatively new chapter, only a few millennia old, the Marine Errant were a void-based chapter known for their mastery of naval warfare and their long involvement in expeditions beyond the edges of the galaxy. Their semi-autonomous strike companies had the ability to respond to threats the length and breadth of the Imperium, used to operating for long periods of time without support, or alongside other Imperial forces, and all of that meant that they were one of the very first forces called in to respond when the first signs of secession showed in the Maelstrom Zone. But as one of those first responders, they were quickly outnumbered and overwhelmed by the secessionists, and while they eventually withdrew from the campaign, replaced by fresh loyalist forces, their brief defiance of the tyrant of Badab would be remembered decades later. The Marine Errant owe their existence and their specific organisation and combat doctrine to the times in which they were founded, the Age of Redemption. The Age of Redemption came at the end of a series of calamities and losses the Imperium suffered through the 36th and 37th millennium, particularly the Plague of Unbelief and Goge Vandire's Reign of Blood, during which time the Imperium was split asunder by infighting and factionalism and vulnerable to Xenos and Chaos assault. As many as 57 Space Marine chapters were lost in battle or declared renegade during the period, and so in the latter part of the 37th millennium, a number of new foundings were declared in an attempt to shore up and reinforce the network of Astartes chapters across the galaxy. The 23rd founding was to consist of 5 new chapters, all of whom were designated as crusading chapters, intended to spend their existence on permanent crusade across the Imperium. They'd be self-sufficient, void-based forces, able to be split and deployed wherever the need took them, even beyond the borders of the galaxy if necessary, and of the 5, the Marine Errant would travel the furthest. The Marine Errant were a successor chapter taken from the gene seed stores of the Eagle Warriors chapter, themselves one of the many second founding successors of the Ultramarines. The gene seed of the 13th Legion was selected for many of the 23rd founding chapters because of its incredible stability, allowing the chapter to grow quickly, and in its initial stages it adopted a variant of the Eagle Warriors colour scheme, halved silver and blue, sometimes depicted as white and blue. And they took the falling star as their symbol, though they're known to make use of alternate schemes and camouflage patterns on occasion. From their creation, they embarked on a series of wars the length and breadth of the galaxy in some of the most far-flung reaches of the Imperium, and they were instrumental in reimposing unity on an empire fractured by the rule of Vandire. The Age of Redemption saw a consolidation of the power of the ecclesiarchy as faith in the God Emperor was renewed. The Marine Errant very much a product of that era, but as it drew to a close, the chapter's ceaseless crusade continued, and they forged for themselves a reputation as masters of fleet-based and void warfare. They fought in the Second Extragalactic Expedition, formed a key component of the Crusade of Spite beyond the Western Fringe, and their individual companies were often seen providing Astartes support to expeditions that were led by other branches of the Imperium. In the early 38th millennium, the chapter made a long-standing pact with the ancient rogue trader house of Ekal. The exact terms of the covenant are lost to history, but companies of the Marine Errant served alongside the rogue traders' forces during a 40-year expedition into the Ghoul Stars, and individual warriors are still seconded to the House of Ekal to this day, the sigil of the house considered a mark of honour within the chapter. The Marines Errant also maintained good relations with numerous other rogue trader fleets, including the House of Baral, whose expedition to Prath Vale was accompanied by a delegation from the chapter, and the armour of the chapter's battle brothers is frequently decorated by crusader medallions and symbols that denote the extended engagements that individual battle brother has fought in. In a similar vein, the chapter also formed one of the core military elements of the fleet led by Lord Inquisitor Cadiron into the Hazaroth Abyss in early M40. However, that was less of a success. The voyage itself was a total disaster. The Marines Errant battle barge was the only ship that returned, and the chapter suffered extremely heavy losses, including many of its ancient dreadnought chassis, Terminator suits, and stocks of Land Raider frame vehicles, as well as countless battle brothers. It was only the chapter's rigid and well-organised structure that allowed it to bounce back from such a disaster. The Marines Errant, as you might expect from descendants of Robute Guilliman, conformed strictly to the organisational structure set out in the Codex Astartes, consisting of 10 companies of around 100 Marines, with the first company being veterans with access to ancient Terminator armour, and the 10th company being the Scout Company, the training ground for new recruits. Where they differ is in how those companies operate. The chapter is still entirely fleet-based, so their command headquarters is stationed aboard their battle barge, rather than on a fixed fortress monastery. Given the wide-ranging nature of their operations, their companies are often dispersed across the galaxy, and so each of their captains is effectively the commander of a strike vessel that serves as the base for that particular company. And given the size of the chapter fleet, these vessels can range from light cruisers all the way up to the chapter's single grand cruiser. The chapter is well aware that these companies might have to deal with any threat they encounter, and so a great emphasis is placed on maintaining the correct balance of arms. Companies endeavour to strike a balance between assault, tactical and fire support units, regardless of their current strength, and it's normal for the 1st Company and the 10th Scout Company to be dispersed between the vessels, supplying each of the companies with a core of heavily armoured veterans and a supply of new recruits. Multiple companies are only gathered during events of great chapter import, and when they do so, the chapter's battle barge serves as a flagship and a command vessel. There are some disadvantages to operating this way, which the chapter has attempted to work around in a number of ways. The chapter recruits heavily from a number of different planets, with individual companies often responsible for keeping a fresh supply of recruits, though this can often mean that new recruits fail to grasp the scale of the organisation at first. In order to foster some sense of a chapter-wide connection, it's common for recruits to be transferred between companies when circumstances allow, and occasional chapter gatherings and joint company missions allow for inter-company promotions and the like. The Marines Errant have also suffered the loss of various companies over the years, individual missions going missing in the void between the galaxies or on campaign, isolated from the rest of the chapter. To try and minimise the effects of such a catastrophe, in addition to the stores on each vessel, the chapter maintains a permanent gene seed repository on the world of Villamus, often guarded by an understrength company, and trains a greater proportion of apothecaries than usual. In this way, the chapter's been able to resurrect whole companies a number of times, though this can still take a long time, particularly because of the requirement that each new company be housed in a new vessel. Interestingly, these practices have often resulted in the chapter being slightly over strength. Keeping an accurate measure of each company's recruitment has often proved difficult, and there are even occasions where companies thought lost and replaced have returned to the Imperium decades or centuries later, resulting in the chapter having more than 10 companies active at a time. The combat doctrines of the chapter favour flexibility and adaptability, with each company expected to handle any threat. The Astartes of the Marines Errant are cross-trained in as many roles as possible. In fact, the chapter as a whole prefers to fill a tactical role with trained Astartes rather than risk their limited stock of fighting vehicles, assault and devastator squads filling roles that would normally be covered by speeders or tanks. Because of this, the Marines Errant are not wasteful of their battle brothers. The recovery to safety of injured Marines and the preservation of gene seed are high priorities even in the thick of combat. Similarly, damaged equipment is recovered for repair whenever possible, their tech Marines eager to keep their companies supplied however they can, and this has been helped by the occasional fortunate discovery on Crusade, which means that while the chapter has overall quite a limited supply of vehicles and advanced war gear, the provenance of that equipment might stretch the full history of the Imperium, with numerous ancient marks of vehicles still in service. There are even rumours of Marines Errant companies pressing into service Xenos technology, though of course such heretical accusations have never been substantiated. Unsurprisingly, the chapter retains a particular specialism in void warfare. The Marines Errant think nothing of fighting in microgravity environments or in the hard vacuum of space, boots maglocked to the hull of enemy starships, or as boarding units in the cramped confines of starship corridors, fighting shoulder to shoulder with their battle brothers with little room to maneuver. To aid in this, the chapter make use of shortened naval pattern bolt guns or upscale boarding shotguns to maximise their effectiveness in cramped environments. After the losses sustained during the ill-fated Calderon campaign in the early 41st millennium, the chapter managed to rebuild its strength enough to make significant contributions to the Corinth Crusade of 698 M41. Operating alongside many other chapters under the overall command of Marnius Calgar of the Ultramarines, the campaign pushed into the Orc Empire of Charadon in an attempt to halt War Skargor, massing in the Corinth system. The Marines Errant were honoured for their stubborn pursuit of Skargor's terror ships, engaging in a number of closely fought boarding actions in the cramped corridors of Orc craft at great risk. Later in the campaign, they rescued the Ultramarines' Third Company, who'd become trapped on the dust moon of Lack after the destruction of their transport ships. The Marines Errant fought through the blockade of freebooter vessels to rescue the stranded company, and were honoured with one of the Ultramarines' relic blades as a token of gratitude. Their involvement in the Badab War, though, would be relatively brief. The Marines Errant were one of the first chapters to arrive in the sector at the direct request of the Firehawks chapter. The Firehawks have responded to the plea for aid put out by the Carthan administration when Luft-Huron of Badab first withdrew the tithe and declared his intent to use it to cleanse the maelstrom. The Firehawks intervened in an attempt to wrest back control of the tithe for the Imperium, but were quickly mired in a slow series of engagements with the Astral Claws, Lamenters and Mantis warriors in the northern Maelstrom zone. The Marines Errant responded to this call for aid with a significant grouping of 6 companies who up until that point had been massing in preparation for the 3rd extragalactic expedition. Their vanguard cruisers arrived in the Maelstrom zone in time to stop the Firehawks from being overwhelmed, but they quickly found themselves caught between a rock and a hard place. The Firehawks, incensed by the retaliation of the secessionists, pushed to go on the offensive, but the Marines Errant, who had fought alongside the secessionist Lamenters during the Corinth Crusade, had no desire to fan the flames of war. As such, they quickly found themselves dispersed, patrolling the shipping lanes that bordered the Carthan sector, and often merely driving off raids from the Lamenters whenever they occurred, both chapters giving quarter to one another, much to the disappointment of their allies. No such mercy was given, though, to the Mantis warriors. The two chapters, both used to fighting across a dispersed region, quickly developed a vicious rivalry. The Mantis warriors engaged in hit-and-run and ambush tactics, which the Marines Errant responded to mercilessly, frequently just destroying craft that had been boarded by the Mantis warriors rather than attempting to reclaim them or capture prisoners, and bombarding the Mantis warriors' bases from orbit rather than engaging on the ground. The Mantis warriors finally gained the upper hand in the conflict in 905 M41 on the moon of Bellerophon's Fall, where they managed to lure the Marines Errant chapter master Corwin Admartha into an ambush, destroying the Vanguard fleet with heavier warships and conducting fast-moving Thunderhawk strikes that left Admartha, 2 chaplains and their 3rd Company captain dead. The remaining Marines Errant were eventually rescued by their 4th Company captain Anton Narvaez, commanding the strike cruiser Star Jackal, and Narvaez took over effective command of the chapter's forces under the brevet rank of Lieutenant Commander for the rest of the war. The losses suffered, though, meant that the chapter were relegated to the fringes of the conflict after this, reformed into an effective fighting force by Narvaez, but mostly delegated to patrolling the Imperial shipping lanes on the edges of the sector. A year later, when Huron's forces were finally declared against by the Inquisition and fresh chapters of loyalist Astartes were tasked to the zone, the Marines Errant withdrew from the war, aggrieved not only by their losses, but what they considered a betrayal by their allies in the Firehawks. Their involvement in the schemes of the Tyrant of Badab, though, was not totally over. Decades later, Luft-Huron, now known as Huron Blackheart, commander of the Red Corsairs, made a target of the Marines Errant gene seed vault on Wilhelm. enormous. The pirate fleets of the Corsairs drew away the garrison company in a series of feints, and along with allies in the Night Lords, they disabled the fortress's void shields. The attack led to the loss of almost all of the Marine Errant's stored genetic material, forcing them to rely on the stocks on their strike cruisers and severely hampering their ability to recruit new Astartes. Though they've been reinforced since, benefiting from the same Primaris advances as many other chapters, it's unknown if these are enough to bring the chapter back to full strength, or if the Marine Errant, after millennia of careful husbanding of their resources, are still struggling to replenish their numbers. I like the Marine Errant. The chapters of the Badab War are a really good cross-section of how all the different Astartes chapters function, and having an entirely void-based chapter, one that act like actual Marines, is a nice inclusion. It also reminds me of the original version of 40k, the Rogue Trader era that the Badab War originally came from. Back in Rogue Trader, when people had much smaller collections, it was pretty common to represent Marine forces as these small elite detachments fighting as part of a larger expedition, and I'm glad that's still there in the fluff. I like them so much that I actually built a little army of them a few years back, which I've never actually used in a battle. They're going to get their very first outing this year as we play through the Badab War on our Tale of Four Gamers series. Maybe they'll turn the tide of the war, or maybe they'll just come out of the loft only to get massacred at Bellerophon's Fall. Who knows? Anyway, back with another Badab chapter next time. Thanks for watching. And if you'd like more stories about the lore of Warhammer 40k, there should be a little video popping up there to the right. And if you'd like to support the channel, there are links to the Patreon and the YouTube memberships below, where you can get a load of perks. And of course, you can press the like and subscribe buttons. See ya!